CPS redesign. So I don't know if you guys have heard a whole lot with, they're doing a whole child and family services redesign throughout the entire state. So there have been some changes that'll impact your reporting based on that. So basically just kind of talking about, and we can make this as long or as short as you want. If you have questions, feel free to stop me. But basic things as far as reporting, you can call the main office here in Welliston, so 774-6300. We run intake for 6 counties in our area. So there'd be Williams, Divide, Burke, Renville, McKenzie, and Montreal counties. We take intakes for all of them, so any 960s for any of those counties. So feel free to just call us. And the other thing too is if you have say somebody in town who's not originally from, who doesn't live here, who doesn't reside in the area, you can still call us. We can take the report and forward it to where it needs to be. We have 2 intake workers in the office, plus myself, and then I do backup, or if they're busy or if one of them is gone, then I help cover for that. As far as what to report, common things that people don't realize need to be reported include domestic violence in the home, obviously things like drug exposure of newborns and other children. If there's things such as sexual abuse going on in the home, whether that's child on child or whether that's parent to child or a non-caregiver, somebody doesn't even reside in the home, all of those things need to be reported to us. Child-on-child sexual abuse and non-caregiver sexual abuse are referred to law enforcement, but we are still involved. Typically, if the child is old enough, a forensic interview will need to be completed, and we coordinate that with law enforcement, plus a social worker has to be present to witness that as well. Other things, obviously physical abuse, if you have any concerns with that, giving us a call. You want to call with those right away. Basically, you call us and or law enforcement when there's an injury that's involved. And they will, law enforcement has to take pictures. Pictures can also be taken by medical professionals, but usually law enforcement likes to have those. That's for chain of evidence if it ever does end up in court. So that's the reason for that. Trying to think if there's anything else that's, condition of home is one that people often talk about, and like hygiene of kiddos. So if you see a child and you have concern for their just general appearance, maybe mom's appearance disheveled or whatever, that sort of thing, you're welcome to report that. We're going to ask you a lot of different questions about what that looks like for you, because of course my standard for personal hygiene might be different than somebody else's, so we'll kind of get that general idea from you guys. That's one thing that did change with the rollout piece, is that we have the CPS redesign change statewide. We have this really, it seems really long intake form that we have to fill out. A lot of times when you write a 960, what we'll do is we'll fill out that form to the best of our ability with the information that you've provided, and then we're going to follow up and give you a phone call and ask you some additional questions to try and get a better idea of what's going on and what you're aware of. We totally understand that you might not always know, but we still have to ask. So that was a big change with this new intake and CPS change. As far as other things to consider, you might be getting phone calls from people who aren't from the area, because with the change, workers in other counties might be coming into Williams to do CPS assessments, to do in-home, to do the foster care piece of it, and so they might be handling those from other counties, and so you might get maybe requests from a CPS worker if it comes past the intake, where a McKenzie County worker might request information from you, and that'll be pretty standard. Eventually we'll be going to a statewide intake, and so it won't even be regionally based. It'll be just, and we don't know how that's going to look yet, and that's probably a ways away, but that is something that's coming in the future, and meaning that your phone calls will be answered by someone who may not even be in the area. The other thing that I did want to also make sure to hit on is that you're all mandated reporters, but the biggest thing to keep in mind as far as like that mandated piece, if you don't report, you know, there is a law that you could be charged with a crime and that sort of thing, but that has to be a willful negligence. So you basically have to know it's child abuse or neglect and not report for that to apply. And then on the flip side of that is it never hurts to give us a call and ask. Like if you're not sure if this would meet the standards for abuse or neglect according to the state law, you can give us a call. The intake workers are trained on that. They'll be able to talk with you. If they don't know, they'll get your information and then we can give you a call back and get you the answer to that.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
So say like a domestic violence type of thing comes in, a woman abused by her husband or something, and it's an assault, we call the police anyways. Do we need to make an additional call to you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep, because they won't necessarily report it. Okay. Usually Williston PD is very good at reporting to us, okay, but not always. Okay. And sometimes it slips through the cracks.
Sure. And
as a mandated reporter, like we totally understand we might get 5 reports on the same incident. Mm-hmm. It's happened.
Sure.
But yes, you should still
have
report.
5 instead of none.
Yep, exactly. Because you can't be sure. Even if you talk to them and say you're going to report this social services, right? That doesn't mean that they're actually going to do. He might, you know, or she might get back to the office and they're writing up their report and they totally space it. You know, lots of different scenarios can happen there.
In that case, where it's as an adult, which form would you fill out?
Well, if there's domestic violence and there's a child in the home. So pregnant woman and domestic violence.
Okay,
Yep.
so not just domestic.
Yep. Unless you're talking vulnerable adult, then you would call law enforcement or your VAPS person. Sure. But if it's domestic violence and you find out that they have little ones in the home, unfortunately for pregnant women, you can still file. We can't do anything about it. But it would be something to have on record should something happen after baby is born. Because the biggest thing, go ahead.
I said, how come you can't do anything for a pregnant person?
Because there's no actual child that's a danger. It's not considered a child until it's born. And North Dakota is one of the few states that can do pregnant woman assessments. Basically, not a whole lot comes of it. So for pregnant woman assessments, you can file a report, and that is pretty common. We do get quite a few 960s from the hospital for moms showing up pregnant, usually lately been positive for THC, but other drugs as well. And then we can open what's called a pregnant woman assessment. We go and we visit with mom. We try to convince her that she should go into treatment, that she should cease her usage, that sort of thing. And if we can convince her to go to treatment and get all that started, then we close the case. If another report comes in as she's continuing to be positive, we do have the option of an involuntary committal where we can file that paperwork through the state's attorney and have her committed until the baby is born, essentially. If she goes and baby is born and there's a concern and she ends up, once baby is born, that her and baby are positive at birth, then we have what's called the alternative response for substance exposed newborns in North Dakota. So that's a new program they rolled out 2017, I believe, November. Was it 2000? Yeah, 2017. And basically we're able to offer services to mom a little bit more intensive where we're in the home more regularly. But it ends up, if she completes that program successfully, there is no finding on her. So a finding means that we've been able to substantiate abuse and neglect. Name goes on an index for 10 years in the state of North Dakota, indicating that that person has had substantiated child abuse or neglect in their history. That index is entirely confidential. You have to sign a release for that information. And typically the only people that ask for it are, we required it for state licensed daycares, but like even the schools around here don't always ask for that to be signed. But nevertheless, there is a finding if there's an actual CPS. So if it's a services required, meaning it was a substantiated, we proved abuse or neglect, then their name goes on the index for 10 years, whether it's mom or dad or both. And then if there's a no services, that means we staffed the case and we thought there was something there, we were concerned, but it didn't reach the level to be able to prove abuse or neglect. The alternative response just gets rid of that altogether, and so mom would never have a finding, at least for that piece of it. That can be changed, so if we get in the home and find out mom is deciding to be uncooperative, then we can bump it up to a standard CPS and go from there. So that is a couple different changes that kind of pertain to you guys here at the hospital. With regard to the domestic violence, if there is another child in the home and you have concerns for domestic okay.
Is that process still okay?
Yep, you're totally fine to do that. So one thing I can do as well is, so with our 2 intake workers, it's always best to email all 3 of us. So if it does get emailed, and I know Tammy has at least 2 of our emails, but I can make sure she has the 3rd person because she just started on intake. But yeah, so emailing it that way is totally fine. Faxing it works as well, and faxing it to our main number, so the 572-9794. That's the Williams County. It's still the Williams County office. We're called the North Star Zone now, so that will be, you'll be seeing zones, human service zones coming out. We had to have those finalized as of January 1st, and it's becoming more. You'll be seeing that more often. So, and in relation to that sort of question, when you're filing a 960, whether or not you should call us or law enforcement, if ever you're in the room and there's a concern for the child and you're not comfortable letting that child go home with caregivers or whatever, keep in mind that 2 things. For one, social services can't remove children. So even as a licensed social worker, I can't remove a child from the parents. We can have law enforcement there, so juvenile court and law enforcement has that authority. The other thing to keep in mind is that medical professionals, doctors, also have that ability to put a child on a 96-hour hold. So they can, I don't know if they would admit the child or however, but child can be held by the doctor for 96 hours if there's that concern. Because there's going to be times where maybe you can't always get a hold of us if you don't. The on-call person can't get there for a little bit of time. The doctor has that authority to put the child in a hold.
Is there a certain paperwork for that?
That would be something you would have to figure out. It should be protocol for you. It's just state law that the doctor can do that. I don't know if.
Okay.
We can work with Tammy.
Yeah, she should have that information.
But yeah,
I mean,
if
'cause
that
like-
was the case, truthfully, I think that we'd wanna probably get case management here involved.
And law
Yeah, and
enforcement too, yeah.
for sure.
Yeah,
I
and
think it would
usually
be
law
best.
enforcement is going to be called, and a lot of times they'll make that call. But in the circumstance, if that ever were to be the case, that can be done. So
So would they have to stay in the hospital, or could they be released to you guys if the doctor puts them on a 96-hour hold?
the doctor cannot give us custody. Law enforcement can, but the doctor cannot. So then that's why I would assume that the child would have to be admitted for the doctor to do that. So it would need to be a 96-hour hold in the hospital itself.
We just had one, and that's what the pediatrician did, is admitted the child for, and then they took it from there. Once we were done doing what we needed to do, the report was there, the police were there, the patient was admitted, and we were done with the case. And
Yeah,
we
and
went on to surgery.
And I think social services got involved.
Yep, they did,
like,
and they
on
took
the
it
floor.
from there.